Hello and welcome to all the men and women of the West. I'm Joe, and this is going to be a solo review video of the Fall of Númenor book that recently came out. Now, I read it in advance of receiving the physical hardcover copy. Now, I read it on Kindle in advance, like I said. Some parts are great. It definitely improves on and puts together a lot of different versions and details of the Second Age from the Lost and Unfinished Tales and from the appendixes. Mainly, it repairs a lot of the different broken texts of stories such as The Mariner's Wife, various Númenorian details such as the tale of Tarmiriel, which I'm very happy with all the details we got of Miriel, Elendil, Ar-Pharazôn. There's a lot that was filled out, and I really like that. On the other hand, I'm a little disappointed that there's not more about Tar-Kiriatan and Tar-Tanamir. I really like these two particular kings, but there's very little that's explored. Tar-Minister has about the same amount of screen time, so to speak, or page time, as he did in other book editions and whatnot. So that's a little disappointing. What this basically does is take all details of the Second Age and put them together. We also have more details on Elros, a lot more. And a lot of what was in other books, even the nature of Middle-earth and whatnot, about the Númenorian culture before its downfall into darkness, and about Elros, has all been compiled. In that regard, this is a great book. It does not have, however, some of the metaphysics of the Númenorians and whatnot, or some of the biological information that might be useful, just the cultural stuff. And a bit about the flora and fauna of the island of Númenor. Also, it contains Sauron's reaction to the Númenorian downfall, and hints at some of the power politics that took place when it comes to Ar-Pharazôn with his departure from Númenor, as well as what Sauron was up to and what Tarmiriel was up to right before this great storm hit. There's some interesting stuff. First off, there's the ban of the Valar, which is imposed on also mortal men. In previous texts, I'm not sure if there was mention of the ban of the Valar being imposed on mortal men specifically. Now, we know that men were not allowed to sail west to Valinor, but whether that was a ban or not, now this book states that the ban is also imposed on the likes of, say, Elros, and this is something he understood and welcomed. This ban that was originally placed on the elves was also extended to mortal men, according to this text. So you can say that's unfair, but it's basically a ban on everyone who's mortal. And I'm including elves when I say mortal, because for all intents and purposes, they are essentially mortal, just ascended mortals. Also, the boats that transported the Edain to Númenor are stated to be between 150 and 300. And there's little details like Meneltarma being 300 feet high and overseeing a great field, that dogs had to be imported onto Númenor because they're not natural there, and Tolkien idealizes bears. Also, squirrels tend to be tamed by women in Númenor, and that's very interesting. And so they'd often live in trees right outside the house and come down and onto the dinner table at dinner. So that was pretty cool. There are details like the valley to the southeast. The ridge to the southeast of Meneltarma is called Tar-Masundar, and it is in its shadow that the Valley of the Tombs of the Kings of Númenor, called Noirinan, is located. With Noirinan meaning Valley of the Kings. So this is where all the tombs of the kings of Númenor were located. There's also details about things like the reunion of the men of Middle-earth and the men of Númenor that took place near the Tower Hills. It was apparently a very warm and beautiful reunion, as both treated each other as lost family, little knowing that in future centuries this reunion would presage lots of violence and blood and slavery. The two sides did have some problems communicating, but they ultimately did find enough keywords to be able to communicate loosely, with civilization restored to these men by the men of Númenor. The narrative of Eldarion is brought in and fixed up just with a few details and whatnot. The text is interrupted at a few points with the story of Galadriel, with Galadriel really one of them that never stopped being aware that Sauron was out there, menacing them all. But she did not, like in the show, go out and try to find him. No. She tried to establish a fortress and prepare for his inevitable return. When the Gwaith-ir Myrdain were corrupted by Sauron, this was the first two to reject Anatar were Gil-galad and Elrond. So that the text implies that Sauron went to, at least in this book, went to first Gil-galad to corrupt him, failed, then approached Elrond and failed. And both of them were suspicious of him. And then he went to Eregion. They are the first two to see through him. So all three of them are communicating and all on the same side. As to the later part of the book, there's interestingly a love triangle that develops. Elendil apparently fell in love with Miriel, Tar Palantir's daughter, and desired to marry her. That's a detail I didn't know about. I don't think was in any other version of the text. Now, I could be wrong. This text specifically mentions that Elendil was in love with her, and Miriel herself was initially attracted to Ar-Pharazôn and desired him despite him being her cousin, because he was the most good-looking man in Númenor. But here it once again repeats specifically that when Ar-Pharazôn came to usurp the throne, she was not willing to lay down the scepter, and that he took her by force against her will and forced a new name on her. There's a later note where it mentions just one line that gives food for thought, and I'm thinking of doing an entire live stream on just that one line. I'm just finding it a very fascinating line from the text, but I'm not going to say what it is because that would be spoiling an entire stream and video. Anyways, the last couple of pages of the text are all about the War of the Last Alliance, where the Sylvan Elves, for example, did not prepare as best they should have, and were not as well equipped as even the mortal men of Middle-earth were, because they didn't like anyone else. And so this caused Gil-galad and I try to help them. They rejected it and just said, no, we're here to help and we don't have to listen to you. And they raced off to their deaths and lost more than 2/3 of their numbers. And that's due to Orofer, Thranduil's dad. Expands a little on some of the text regarding the War of the Last Alliance, but mostly rehashes details we already knew. It is quite interesting, and I like that it compiles all the different strands about the Second Age and puts them together. So this is a really, really good book. Now, I do have some issues. I wanted there to be more details, but I think this is all that Tolkien wrote, along with the nature of Middle-earth, on the Second Age and what you find in the appendices and Finished Tales and Lost Tales. So this is basically a compilation, and I'm a little disappointed. I was hopeful. Yeah, I know I shouldn't have got my hopes up as much as I did, but we got a lot of details for what it's worth. A lot of interesting stuff out of this. I'm going to rate it now, and I'm in a different rating down the road, but at first glance, I'm going to rate this a 2. It's just a compilation of other stuff, but there is a lot of cool stuff to be found here. I'll probably up my rating when I get to reading this book and exploring the Second Age with Dan. Tell me what you think in the comments section if you've already read it, or what you think of this overall general exploration of this book, and of how it's divided basically in the first part between Elros and Eldarion's reign, then Minas Tirith and some of his immediate successors, and then, you get the last bit with Pharazôn and the Last Alliance. So if you enjoyed this review, don't forget to smash that like and that subscribe button, as though you were Eru Ilúvatar raining down his wrath upon Númenor.